Teachers of Reddit, what is your "this student is so dumb it's scary" story? Part 2. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. Kid clearly had autism, and rather low functioning at that. I was his keyworker and could only get him to respond to textures or music. He was only 2, but wouldn't answer when called and would just sit vacant in the room while all of the other children got up and moved into the other room. Just not there, in the here and now, unless, like I said, I played a song and he'd come to life. He'd sit at the table vacant unless I put his hands into something that felt different, water, sand, etc. I told my boss that I thought he had autism and she replied, "Autism is nonsense, he's just lazy." So I continued teaching him as though he was autistic because that's the only way I could get him to learn. Fast forward and yep, he's autistic. Not a teacher, but I could feel the pain of my teacher because of this one student's dumb answers. So this teacher was a very smart man who hated 10th graders, but was tasked with teaching design studies. Now there is this one kid who isn't very bright but definitely thinks he is. One day we were learning on how to do our assignment of building styrofoam boats when my teacher asked, "Can anyone define buoyancy? I know you all know it makes things float, but can you tell me why?" And this kid raises his hand. The teacher by now knows that the kid doesn't actually know the answer but calls on him just for amusement and because no one else had their hand raised. Kid says, "Well, if you drilled holes into a steel cube it would float," and goes on a while about this steel cube. Teacher: "No. It's because the water is exerting a force on the object." Keep in mind this teacher is a physics teacher and was a nuclear physicist. Another time, while racing the boats. Teacher is explaining the rules. You don't have to beat everyone, you just have to beat the person with the fastest time. Like if you have to outrun a bear you only have to outrun the slowest people. Kid chimes in, "What if I could run really fast? Like as fast as a jet?" Teacher just turns around and keeps teaching. Loved that teacher. I felt his pain and admire his restraint from laughing. My friend and I didn't hold back. High school senior philosophy class. They were discussing Chinese philosophy and the guest speaker made an analogy with a horse and carriage, saying the Tao was the carriage and Confucianism was the horses. Or something like that. I was sitting in on the class and it's been years. She's discussing pretty esoteric stuff in great detail, and it was a great introductory crash course. She finishes. "Any questions?" One kid raises his hand. "What's a carriage?" This is the same kid I heard get into a debate his sophomore year where we said, public school kids are stupid, and it's their fault they land there instead of somewhere better. Yeah, mommy and daddy had landed him a spot at a cheap, easy, private school and he took that to mean he was gifted. Heard of, first grade, girl crying. Turned around to see a girl with her shoe off barefoot hiding something in one hand with a pair of scissors in the other. I asked her what the matter was. She told me that she had half of a sock, and opened her hand to clearly show a poorly cut up sock. I asked her why she cut her sock up and she said she didn't realize it would cut the sock. Great thinking, kiddo. Not a teacher but oh well. So in middle school had an STD class we had to take for health and we were in middle school so there was only 5 boys who weren't laughing the entire time. So the teacher told us that skin-to-skin contact could result in STDs and then there was this one boy who always had the dumb questions but this question made the class lose it. He asked, "So we can get STDs by holding hands?" This was in middle school for me. There was this one girl who was known as being, to be perfectly blunt, the dumbest piece of shit to walk the earth. She didn't know what a penguin was. She didn't know our state was in America and didn't know the USA was a part of North America. I mean, this is just the barest tip of the iceberg. I heard her parents were like both research scientists or something. No clue what goddamn hurricane whipped that apple off that tree. She did not in any way have a learning disability or other neurodivergent issue. I had an IEP myself, she was just dumber than a stick. Anyways, the longest interaction I ever had with this hollow lump was in home EC class. A day or two before I'd accidentally gotten my finger smashed in a door, long story. And she looks at me with this blank-eyed stare and says, "That doesn't sound that painful." And I said, "Well, it was a very heavy door and it was very painful." And she kept insisting, "Smashing your fingers isn't painful." And well, I snapped. I was an angry child by default, again, long story. So I grabbed our massive home EC textbook and slammed it on her hands. Unfortunately, I missed, and she kept dodging and telling me to stop doing that. So I asked, "If smashing your fingers doesn't hurt then why do you keep dodging?" This was before I was a teacher. I took my wife white water rafting for her birthday. We got to a point where people could jump in the pools and float a few meters downriver. Well, one person starts and several follow. Suddenly a commotion. This one got jumped in. Apparently he couldn't swim, so his girlfriend jumped in after she could swim. Thankfully it wasn't a crazy section and they were wearing like jackets. A few of us grabbed our throw bags and got them to shore. Relief. Until he did it again. Seriously, WTF. I worked as an unofficial TA in college and was in charge of a student publication. Taught it as a class because while it was open to all students, certain students had to work it as a practicum course. One of the students was very quiet, but very nice. Didn't participate in class, but their effort was supposed to go into their written works, so it was fine. Deadline for their rough drafts arrived and he turned in 2 pages, much shorter than the expected 800-word article. Whatever, I can work with him. But it looked weird. There were no quotes. There was no attempt made to write from a neutral perspective. Suspicious. I copied and pasted the first 2 paragraphs into Google and .yep. Every word taken from an online brochure. He had contacted no sources, done little to no research, just pasted the text into Word and reformatted it. When we had our individual consultation, I gently asked him, "This doesn't seem to have any sources or quotes in it." Just trying to feel him out. He stared at me with a blank expression. I mean, it kind of feels like it's missing some research. He just looked at me. Who did you consult with for this article? Who did you interview? Silence. He just kind of waited out the half hour with silence. Did this work for him in high school? In his English comp courses in college? I have no idea how this worked for him. Ultimately, I had to bring it to the attention of the professor on the course. She said what I couldn't, which is that he plagiarized the entire piece, and stupidly. He was withdrawn from the course. I felt bad, really bad, but something the professor said stuck with me. Some people aren't cut out for college. I hate to say this, but not everyone is academically smart enough to do this work. People are smart in their own ways, I believe, but maybe the kind of work college requires doesn't compute with everyone. Unfortunately, he dropped out of college sometime later. I saw him a few years ago, working at the local movie theater as an assistant manager. He saw me and booked it into the office without talking to me. Sad face. I worked as a substitute for a while. The first question the kids always asked me was why their teacher wasn't there. They never tell the substitutes this, but they expected that I would know. So I'd just start making stuff up and the kids would totally fall for about anything. I had a high school class get very upset that their English teacher didn't tell them she was going to space camp. I also had a habit of telling the elementary kids that their teacher had to go to the ocean because they were really a mermaid and needed to go to the ocean regularly or they wouldn't be able to change back. They always thought that was a good reason to be absent. I teach in the UK and it's horrifying how many students think our emergency services number is 911. I also had an 11-year-old girl once who was convinced we live in America and wasn't sure she'd heard of England, the UK. A boy came to me asking to borrow a pen because his didn't work. I took his pen, tried it and it worked fine, so he went back to his desk. I watched him take the pen, hold it upside down and try writing with it again. A minute later he came back saying it still didn't work. I had to show a 12-year-old which end of the pen was the right end. He even had ink all over his hand from holding it wrong. I had a girl attack a blind student because he was coming at me with a stick. I explained to her that he was blind and he used that to see his way around. She responded, "Ain't nobody come at me with no stick." This was high school. And #X200B. I got a mimeopad because they are a hell of a lot cheaper than smartboards. I doodle a lot, so before the first day of class started for the new year I had doodled a bunch of weird little hieroglyphics on the board. It was just all nonsense akin to wingdings. I leave it up without erasing when the kids come in. One kid sits down and then raises his hand. Student. Do we need to copy this down? Me. Why would you do that? Student. It's on the board. Is it the rules? Me. What? That's not even words. Student. Yes it is. It's written on the board. Me. Okay then, read it. Turns out the student couldn't read at all. I mean, he didn't even know the names of letters. He was in the 9th grade. And #X200B. I had a student ask me why we didn't always die in our sleep. I asked him why we would. He said because we weren't awake to think about breathing. I asked him if he thought about that all the time. He replied that indeed he did. He thought about every breath he took and he struggled every night because he was terrified to go to sleep because he thought he might die. I explained the autonomous systems of the body. He told me the next day that he was so happy he almost cried before he went to bed that night knowing he wasn't going to die in his sleep. He was in the 10th grade. In #X200B, 10th grade girl asks me what happened to Hitler because we are reading night. I tell her he committed suicide but we used science to bring him back as a zombie and we keep him in a prison cell under the Pentagon serving a life sentence for every person who died because of him. Her bottom lip starts quivering and then she busts out in sobs. I ask her what is wrong because I'm totally confused. She starts babbling about, what if he gets back out and does it again? Entire class stares at her and a boy looks at me and asks, is she for real? I watch tears roll down this girl's face and I say her name and calmly tell her that I was being sarcastic that Hitler committed suicide and is dead. What I said to her was impossible because zombies aren't real. Yes, they are. I see them on TV all the time. So then I had to explain that zombies aren't real and that people don't come back from the dead. It took a while to convince her. In #X200B, I had a kid, 9th grade, bring me a cell phone and this kid is crying and wants me to punish his classmate for locking him out of his phone. I asked the classmate if he did it. Classmate, he stole that phone. Me. What? Classmate, that's a stolen phone. He's mad at me because I locked him out of a phone that he stole. Me to thief. Wait, really? So you want me to punish him for locking you out of a phone that you stole from someone else? Crying thief. Yes. Me to thief. You realize that if I write him up for that I have to include a write-up for you stealing. Crying thief. Why? Me. Is this seriously a conversation? I'm not helping you. Classmate. He steals phones all the time. There's like 8 in his book bag. Don't leave no bike out in your hood either. Me glaring at thief. I don't steal bikes. Classmate. You stole my bike, thief. Oh yeah. Me. Did you really just admit that? Not a teacher but a student. I was in a geology class and the teacher was talking about lava and this one kid stops the teacher to ask, does lava burn? Like would anything bad happen if I put my finger in it? Naturally the teacher and the rest of us assumed he was joking and the teacher just kinda laughed. The kid then says that he's actually serious. The teacher just kinda looks at him like, WTF, and he says yes and carries on not wanting to waste time. I was still convinced the kid was joking so I asked him after class if was just joking and trying to fuck with the teacher when he said he was serious. He then tells me that he really was serious. That's not the first time he said something that dumb so I don't find it very hard to believe that he might have been serious. Not a teacher myself, but my teacher told us this story. I should mention that I live in Israel and OFC the lessons are in Hebrew. So we had an essay we had to write in English about people who influenced on our lives. And there was one student who used a lot of Google Translate. He probably just ran the whole text through it. Our teacher's last name is Ben Avraham. And yes, he ran it through the translator, so he called her son of Abraham. In a rural school district in TX, a thick electric cable spans over the rec area and 50 middle schoolers, lunchtime. One of whom decides to throw rocks at the squirrels that use said cable as a bridge. Student hits poor squirrel minding its own business that then falls several feet directly onto student's face. Unharmed, poor Mr. Squirrel scampers off and 6th grader gets a scratched up face and rabies shots. On mobile sorry for format. Student here had fellow classmates that didn't know. Asterisk what helium was, high school. What a penis was, 7th grade, asterisk 60 plus 60 was not 180, college. That 10 decimeters does not equal 1 decimeter, college. You can't vape in class after winning the election for ASB president, 11th grade. Putting rocks in your instrument, will in fact, break said instrument, middle school. You have to put water in your ramen cup before microwaving it, high school. You cannot pick up broken glass in handfuls, high school, had to go get stitches. Not wearing goggles during lab will result in a purple stain on your eyes that lasts for a few months, high school. Stomping on someone's head during a fight after they hit the ground as attempted murder, 9th grade. I had an idiot moment, but honestly it was the way the teacher explained it along with me often spacing out and reading, working on Mars. Well actually it was my fault entirely for not paying attention from the beginning. So I zone in halfway through the discussion and she's saying something about how mustard gas was repelled with pee and cloth, and some other info that wasn't tying any of it together. I was just lost and intrigued. I mean, can we just go back to the weaponized pea and cloth? So I went. What, did they just light it on fire and chuck it? Class just laughed while she had the funniest WTF look on her face and said a little quietly, no. Pea isn't flammable. Don't even know where my brain was there. Oh right, it was lost. One of my sisters was a teen mom. So they were learning about cloning. Her head was so filled with cloning that she suddenly went, so then where do babies come from? Her teacher was like, you of all people should know that. She still laughs about it. I was a substitute teacher for a 6th grade science class, one in a school that I frequently substituted in. I knew most of the students fairly well and had subbed for this particular class of students quite a few times. There was one particular kid, let's call him Mason. Mason wasn't the brightest bulb of the bunch, but I never expected such a spectacularly idiotic question. We were talking about the strongest metals, the densest ones, and we were on the topic of diamonds. Mason raised his hand, and I think the entire class could already sense the loss of brain cells incoming. If diamonds are so unbreakable, why don't they just make schools and banks out of diamonds? Utter silence. So I'm going to keep this short. I was teaching my kids how to spot the difference in things. I started out with a group of boys with blue shirts and boys with white shirts and asked them if they could spot the difference. Cool. So I asked a girl to spot the difference between a whale, a dog, a cat, and a mouse. Like the genius she is, she said, one doesn't have any legs. Awesome. Now I ask this boy who just doesn't have it mentally lol to spot the difference between himself and the students who wore glasses. This boy said, I don't got no legs. I was in shambles. I had to leave so I could laugh properly SMH. Student here, and I was in 4th grade at the time. Well, there was this kid that liked to mess with people all the time. One day teacher left the room for a little bit, so it was just a bunch of kids in the room supposed to be doing a test. Well, this kid hoes in front of the class, and puts a stapler to his ear threatening he would staple his ear if we didn't help him, so another kid goes up and hits the stapler stapling his ear. I'm not sure if this is what you mean, but it's pretty damn funny. So I am lecturing on population, 15-year-olds 9/10th grade. I tell the students that most likely human population will peak at 10.5 billion. A hand goes up and says, oh, what does peak mean? I'm stunned as well as the class, but he is serious, so I answer. I have another teacher in the room, and when we are alone asked what I had thought when I heard the question. I thought if your father hadn't peaked I would have been spared that question. Same kid. Teaching patriarchal and matriarchal society, which has nothing to do with sex, intercourse, but a hand goes up and he asks, so if matriarchal is women and patriarchal is men, then who's in charge of the lesbos? But before I could respond his friend says, you're a moron. The lesbos take care of the lesbos. My class took a while to recover.